I'll get back to our panelists today. Today we happen to have Manfred Ekpe. He's a law student from Nigeria and well conversant with the political issues of Zimbabwe. Secondly is Julius Kawesa. He's also a law student and very conversant with the political issues and what's happening in Zimbabwe. And thirdly is Atukunda Arthur Nyatha. He is a public health student, but a very a politician who likes articulating issues out the way they are. I welcome you all to the Vantage media panel today to discuss the political issues happening in Zimbabwe as we celebrate Mugabe's death. Mr. Ekpe, you've had the history of Mugabe. Do you think he's a hero? Or he should not be celebrated at all? Do you think they should make his portrait and put it in a museum? Or it's not necessary?
All right, yes. In my opinion, and I think in the opinion of every black man, every African, Robert Mugabe was a hero. He was a hero in the sense that he fought for independence, not only of Zimbabwe, his country, he also fought for the independence of all African countries that were in the clutches of colonization. So, Mugabe also has always been called a racist, but Mugabe is not a racist. If you look at the trend in the world, you would see that when once an African leader, a black leader, does something for the interests of his country, the whites, the West, would brand him with different kind of negative brands. For instance, you see, when Robert Mugabe became the president of Rhodesia, became the prime minister of Rhodesia and later president of Zimbabwe, he had to change the name from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. That was one of his first things, because the name Rhodesia was given by the colonialists, and by changing that name, he was seen in the West as anti-white. Right? You see, Mugabe actually had to redistribute land in Zimbabwe from the year 2000. He had to redistribute land from the white minorities to also for the black majorities to also have share in the land of Zimbabwe, which is their native land, their native country. They have nowhere to go. You can recall that when the whites came to Africa to colonize, in some countries, particularly in West and Southern Africa, it actually did not happen. In Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa, it actually did not really happen in the western part of Africa. The white had to take the land by force from the blacks.
So, okay,
that is what happened in South Africa. That is what happened in Zimbabwe. So what is wrong? What was wrong from Robert Mugabe coming to redistribute the land so that the white will have share, the blacks will have share?
Okay.
That is why he is being branded by the West as a violent, a racist. Thank you.
Cool. Then now, yes, you said he brought change to Zimbabwe and he did so much for them. And this question will go next to Arthur Atukunda. You know, on a number of reasons, like you see in Zimbabwe, we have the whites, the blacks, all this. What would seem good to a black would be bad to a white. Now, when Mugabe came to power, they say he put the economy back in a way that they had lost the economy to the whites. And now when he came to power, they say he indeed fixed the economy and the country started rising gradually. But towards his downfall, the economy went back down when the money lost value. However, some people still say, though the value, they lost the value for the money, the good things he did at the beginning still count. So Arthur, how do you look at that economically for Mugabe?
Okay, for me, first of all, I believe that Robert Mugabe is a hero for so many reasons, of course. And it is a bit unfortunate that you specifically pinned into the economic issue. Okay, well, we can discuss that as well.
Okay. We still have time. We shall share more.
Yeah, of course, when Robert Mugabe took over power in 1980 as Prime Minister, the economy of Zimbabwe was one of the best in the whole of Africa, especially centered around agriculture and as well as mining of chromium and a few other minerals. So yeah, the economy was doing very well, but it was in the hands of the white minority. The black Africans, who were the majority in the country, did not own any farms, they did not own any mining companies, so they were poor. The economy was not African, it was an artificial economy under the control of whites. So if we say that the economy was doing well, well, somebody will ask you a question, it was doing well for who? For whites, who were about 3% of the population, or for blacks who were suffering? So in my opinion, much as the economy later went into a nosedive around 2000 because of the indigenization policies around land, which I think Mugabe had to do, and for which, I mean, I would definitely proclaim him an African hero. I mean, the nosedive was mainly because of the economic sanctions that were imposed upon Zimbabwe by the West because of the indigenization policies. So for me, I wouldn't use that as a yardstick to judge Mugabe, because I exactly understand how the politics of our world work.
Okay, fine, thank you. Now, Mugabe has been in power for almost 40 years. So when he came out, when he lost power, but he had a defense always. He always said that I'm elected. I'm not here illegally, I'm elected. So, Julius Kawesi, I want to give you this question. You know, do you feel Mugabe's existence as a president should not be considered, because he was there constitutionally? So and he was elected by the people. So what does it mean? And this is a president who used to win massively in elections. At the same time, this is the very same man who was chased out of that same office by the people themselves. How can that happen? That you are loved and elected, and at the same time, you're not loved. Well, how can that happen?
Thank you. Elections in Africa, first of all, if we look at the subject of Robert Mugabe and Zimbabwe in a broader perspective, elections in Africa have become cosmetic. Something that people can no longer rely on as a means of changing power. Okay. Unfortunately, while dictators are being grilled about the existence of democracies in their countries, they ignorantly claim that they hold elections. Elections are becoming a routine activity which is being undertaken by dictators purposely to cling into power. In situations where elections become violent, at the initial start of the campaigns, where people are being beaten, campaigns which occur while the president is still president and sitting in chair and has not resigned, while other candidates are being imprisoned and keeps on rotating around the country looking for votes and conversing for support, cannot be regarded as a level playing field for everyone to campaign in and call an election a genuine election. So this is what happened in Zimbabwe. Dictators, during their own visions of overstaying in power, unfortunately,
May I interject where?
Yes, you can.
I would like you to explain to us what you mean by dictators.
Yes.
Is
Yeah,
it what you feel?
Because you made a
exactly
conclusion.
or what the West always
Yes,
tells us.
because
These are dictators.
you made a conclusion that he was a dictator.
Yeah.
So how do
Why
dictators
is
hold
it?
elections?
What is the yardstick for the measurement of a dictator?
Yes.
Thank
yes.
Okay.
thank
Yes.
you so much. There's what we call an absolute dictator and there is a benevolent dictator.
Yes. So Mugabe was.
The dictators of the time in Africa here are educated leaders. Well, the moderator mentioned that Robert Mugabe had over 15 degrees on his head. Now this is what educated dictators do. They rule while twisting the provisions of constitutions. It has happened in Africa and everywhere in Africa, where they find a provision that bars them from continuing with their legacy of leadership. Provisions of the constitution are changed, whether they have the support of the people or not. In fact, the consultations that are undertaken at the initial stages of amending the constitution is in favor of dictators are not consultations, because now while we rely on MPs who serve the interests of sitting leaders, the common man is being ignored. Robert Mugabe terrorized villages and villages of people, especially the Ndebele, who were opposed to his continuous existence in the leadership of the country of Zimbabwe. Many people were killed as Mugabe propelled his vision and the end result.
So can we conclude that Mugabe used to rig elections?
Mugabe used to do general elections well and good, but we cannot use elections in Africa as yardsticks to measure the level of dictatorship, the level of democracy. In fact, elections are a continuation of oppression in Africa, because they are not free and fair in Africa. That is what is being held in Zimbabwe, Uganda, and many other countries.
Mr. Moderator,
Yes.
may I
But
respond to that?
before you respond, Ekpe must have a burning issue, because I see him looking with the face which is like, really? So what do you talk about elections in Zimbabwe? Because when you look at how Mugabe has been winning elections, it has been massive, and there has never been a very serious opposition that you feel like almost knocked him out. So what do you feel, topping up on what Kawesa said? What do you feel?
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Kawesa happened to be a friend of the Western press, who would always put Africa on the bad light every time. You see, what is happening is this: there is always elections in Africa. Elections in some countries in Africa, or certain elections in Africa, are always actually free and fair elections, even though there may be hiccups, as there would be hiccups in any human activity everywhere in the world, even in the United States.
Okay.
So you see, when the West, the United States and its allies, will dislike you, they will feed to the world through their press that that election was not free and fair. But what are the indices to judge that the election was not fair and fair? As far as I'm concerned, the elections in Zimbabwe usually reflect the will and the wishes of the majority of the Zimbabwean people. That is the reason I would disagree that Mugabe was overthrown by the people. No, Mugabe was not overthrown by the people. Mugabe was overthrown by a mafia. And you could remember, yes, you could remember very well that when Mugabe was overthrown, there was massive protest all over Zimbabwe, pro-Mugabe protest. If Mugabe have not been winning elections, where did we get those crowds that came out protesting when he was overthrown. You can see. So all these are just Western media propaganda. Oh, there was no good election. Look at, for example, what is happening in Venezuela when Nicolas Maduro actually won the election, and testified by so many people. But since Maduro is anti-America, America now have to sponsor, guide them, the leader of the legislature with the propaganda that the election was not fair and fair.
Okay. No, one of the reasons why Mugabe was overthrown, it was alleged that it was because of corruption, rigging elections, abuse of human rights, brutality, violence by the police, and so on. And the reason why all this happened was because the election which were held in 2013, when Mugabe won the election and they say it was characterized by violence, fraud, and rigging, and so on. He told me something that Mugabe was not overthrown by the people, it was by a mafia,
Yes.
who was then his vice president. It was so surprising. Now, Arthur, you had something to talk about.
No, please, can you permit me to clarify what you've just raised?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. You see, they're saying that to give a dog a bad name in order to hang it is very real, and it's a prime example of what happened in Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe did not have any issue with the mafia, but it was when Robert Mugabe was getting aged. He was 93 years old, and the mafia felt that he would die. So now there was no succession plan. His wife and the vice president were seen as the two principal people fighting for a seat should the president die. So the wife of the president allegedly caused the removal of the dismissal of the vice president, who escaped on exile to South Africa, from where he conspired with China and used the head of the military and all other the military mafias, Chiwenga, and Robert Mugabe was overthrown.
Okay.
So they would have their reason that it was because of rigging election. Just come to think of it, election was in 2013. He was overthrown in the ending of 2017. Could it have been the reason for rigging election? No. It was just a matter of giving the dog a bad name in order to hang it.
Okay, fine. Now, you reminded me of something that I want us to discuss about. It's about succession.
I haven't replied to him.
You had a question earlier.
I wanted a brief reply to him, specifically to
Okay,
something
a minute.
he said about
Yeah, a minute.
All right.
You can have a minute
So,
to talk about that.
no, he was talking about dictators and elections in Africa, which are used mainly to just stamp, continued perpetuation of power by the so-called dictators, in your opinion. But for me, I say that our leaders do not lead, independent, making decisions independent of circumstances around them. I mean, Robert Mugabe, and it's alleged, in 2008, I think, election, when he was standing with Morgan
Tsvangirai.
Yes, Shanghai. I mean, there were reports that this guy was a stooge of the British, the MDC candidate. The British had put him to undermine Mugabe so that they can probably, maybe, have their agendas be fulfilled in Zimbabwe. In case maybe Mugabe was gone, they were always going to probably return the land back to the whites and undo everything that Mugabe had done.
Okay,
So
fine.
if you're Mugabe, what do you do? I mean, I know you're probably going to say that he shouldn't overturn the opinions of his people, but if you indeed know exactly what your people don't know, and that you're going to probably have the country regress in most, in areas like land acquisition, what do you do? Do you allow Morgan Tsvangirai a stooge of
I
other
wish to
people?
give him a
Okay,
brief answer.
now,
Yes,
now,
I
now,
want
now,
that.
now-
I'm
Just a
saying
brief
no,
answer.
I wouldn't
Yes.
say.
Okay, fine.
Brief
Now,
answer.
Kawesi, I'm
Yes.
coming to you.
Yes.
Now, you just give a brief something about that, but this also comes as we look up to winding up this discussion. I always quote His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, when he had just come to power, he said that one of the biggest problems of African leaders is overstaying in power. And when you look at Mugabe, has been in power for almost 40 years. And the problem was still on succession. He was aging, but succession was an issue which Ekpe talked about. Now, what I want us to discuss, like, you know, what issues arose when Mugabe was almost going to, when Mugabe was challenged by the people and the mafias, as Manfred says it. People said he wants his wife to replace him. Others were like, no, he wants the deputy, or certain kind of vice, so they had to make a coup. Now, it all brings us to an issue of succession. Now, Julius, in a minute, I would want you to talk about succession to African leaders. What should African leaders do to better their politics? And then at the same time, Manfred will talk about the same. And then Arthur will talk about the same. And we'll wrap up the panel.
Thank you,
discussion.
Mr. Moderator.
A minute, please.
A minute. Honesty is very important in leadership. Where a leader loses the values of honesty, the whole country is going to go into shambles. African leaders, what they do mostly is to speak one word today and they speak the other day. In 1986, in 1986, yes, while Yoweri Museveni, for example, was capturing power, in fact, he was swearing on the runners of the Ugandan parliament. He said, this is not a mere change of guards, it is a fundamental change. A fundamental change means a change in the social, political, and economic aspects of a country. The biggest problem of Africa is leaders overstaying in power, and it is the major cause of all problems in Africa. And now, what arises out of overstaying power by African leaders? What are the implications of that? When leaders overstay in power, power corrupts. Power corrupts, they become drunk of power. In fact, that's where the zeal to make successors of their own children and wives comes in. In Uganda, there are rumors, for example, like it was in Zimbabwe, where Mugabe wanted his wife to succeed him. In Grace Mugabe, in Uganda, there are rumors that Yoweri Kaguta Museveni wants to use his son Muhoozi Kainerugaba to succeed him. Africa is going to the dogs. Now, briefly running into the issue of land and distribution. This was a structured adjustment program. This was a structured adjustment program. Thank you. A structured adjustment program, which was brought by whites as a means of reorganizing African economies from the traditional economy to a more monetized economy alongside democracy. It involved privatization and redistribution of resources. And now, Mugabe thought nationalization was going to solve the problem of Zimbabwe. He did it the other way around. What Mugabe would do is to look at the land tenure system critically, since land is a major factor of production. You don't handle unimportant production means to an incompetent personnel. The people in Zimbabwe had not yet acquired skills in production. Therefore, they could not manage land and agriculture in an economic manner.
Well, thank you, Kawesa.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Manfred,
Yes.
in a minute. On the same question.
Permit me, Mr. Moderator, to depart from what my what my learned friend is trying to put forward. One, I am very uncomfortable in certain notions. You see, number one, Robert Mugabe did not only alleged. It was only alleged that he wants his wife to succeed. It was only an allegation, just like the case of Uganda is also an allegation. That's number one. Number two is when you say African problem in the United States, in England, so many white people would say Africa, Africa, as if Africa is a country. My learned friend here is also talking in that wrong notion as if Africa is a country. When you say Africa lacks succession plan, let us look at Tanzania, let us look at Kenya, let us look at Nigeria, let us look at South Africa, let us look at Ghana and other African countries where there is always successful transmission of power from one president to another, from one party to another. So when you say Africa has has a problem of succession. I mean, is a bit awkward. And to go into the economic aspect of Zimbabwe, it is not the indigenization of the factors of production by Robert Mugabe that caused the economic breakdown of Zimbabwe. It was the unreasonable sanctions that the United States and its allies and its stooge, which is the United Nations, placed on Zimbabwe simply because he has decided to redistribute the factors of production, which is land, so that the indigenous Africans would also have share in the land. It was that sanction that was placed, that unreasonable sanction that was placed on Zimbabwe that brought about the economic turndown. It was not mismanagement. Thank you,
Manfred. And finally, Arthur Atkunda.
Yeah.
On the same question about transmission of power and succession. Just how African leaders, they say they keep so long in power. Would it be the reason why Mugabe was ousted, that people were tired of him?
No, I don't think that was
In the
the reason.
meantime.
Of course, there could have been several things raised here that we can talk about, like maybe the wrong information he gave about how land was redistributed by whites rather than grabbing from our people. I don't want to go into that. But for me, I think on the issue of succession, I think we have, it's an issue again of neo-colonialism, where the whites would like to tell us that their practices are always the best and we ought to adopt to them. So
But
they
this
come here to dictate to
if I
us.
interrupt you,
Yeah.
this statement was from an African leader himself who
Why?
said the problem of Africa is leaders who
Yes,
overstep from power.
Yoweri Museveni was.
What inspired him?
Was he 42 years of age by then?
He was in
And
his
people-
late 40s, I
Yeah,
think.
no.
He was
Yes.
influenced by the
People-
He was influenced by the West, who actually helped him to attain power
Yes.
at that time.
People's minds
Now we know better.
evolve. People's minds evolve. This is why earlier on I said that leaders do not make decisions independent of circumstances around them. Of course, the realities of life hit hard
Then
when
they
he
cease
was
to
in
be leaders.
leadership.
They cease to be
And
leaders.
so, no. He has to
Because of
evolve.
circumstances and ignore your head, you
No,
cease to be a leader.
It is very important. You cannot bury your head in the
Mugabe will
sand.
create a land fund.
Yeah,
Create a land
does not
fund.
This is my
involve-
time, by the way.
And buy land from
Mr.
the whites.
Modoka, this is my time that is being
Please,
defended.
I request that
Yeah,
Arthur
so I would
conclude.
like to conclude by saying, of course, I cannot give opinions basing on propaganda that we had
Okay.
about Grace Mugabe and Janet Museveni. That's propaganda that is probably designed to smear our leaders in a very,
Okay, well,
Bad light.
we've gotten, as we wrap up, we've gotten the opinions of the three panelists. Manfred Ekpe, Julius Kawesi, and Arthur Atkunda. We've had a much about Robert Mugabe, and to some extent, he should be celebrated. And to some extent, people like Kawesi said, no, he should not be celebrated, he was a dictator. But despite all, putting that all aside, Mugabe has been a leader for almost 4 decades, and did his best, and is celebrated as one of the best Pan-Africanists the world has ever had. It's now time, as we thank you all for coming and sharing your opinions with us.